Now, what's Virat Kohli angry about here? Relax, relax.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of Radio Cricket. That's 47, the same number of times that MS Dhoni has been compared to Jesus by Ravi Shastri. I'm Nishant Joshi, real life saviour, at least one IPL cheerleader, and I'm joined by the man who has had many a liaison with women dressed in skimpy skirts. Well, you know what they say, Thailand offers many different pleasures. It is James Marsh.
Thank you very much, Nishant, but perhaps we should move swiftly from Bangkok to Dikok, and who I believe is now firmly behind you on Twitter. So why don't you tell us about that and the rest of your week?
Yes, James, it's been a very interesting week for me on Twitter, James, as obviously one of our Radio Cricket cult heroes has started to follow us. Yes, dear listeners, Quinton de Kock is now following at Alt Cricket, and I'm sure you are all as thrilled as I was when I first noticed that we were being backed by de Kock. Now, it's been a long road to get de Kock on board. Of course, as we all know, de Kock needs time to get his eye in, but now that he's hanging on our every word, I'm sure we're in for a devil's roller coaster of a journey together.
Well, that's excellent, Nishant. Just make sure you don't rub de Kock up the wrong way, because I believe that's actually what you may have done to Harsha Bhogle this week on Twitter.
Yes, James, I was somewhat accosted by everybody's favourite BCCI employee, excluding Ravi Shastri, of course, that is Harsha Bhogle. I made a joke about one of his quotes the other day, which is warped out of context to the point where it did lose all recognition, which does, to be fair, happen quite often on Twitter, especially when you do search your name on Twitter just to see if anybody's written about you. And it was warped to the extent where Harsha Bhogle essentially took my tweet to be a slight on the fact that he wears glasses. Now, the point that Harsha seemed to misunderstand is quite curious, because if I really wanted to take the piss out of a commentator who's paid $100,000 per year to be the mouthpiece of the BCCI, insulting his eyesight would probably be well down the list. Now, James, I received a few hundred tweets of pure vitriol from Bogle's Twitter fans, which were met by several hundred more of our followers tweeting back at them. And James, I must say, it was quite heartening to see that in amongst all the terrible name-calling flying about, followers of Alt Cricket, well, I have to say, you guys don't half know your snark. I was, like a proud father, seeing my son take his first steps, although this was a bit more like Frankenstein's creator, seeing Frankenstein take his first steps as he descended upon innocent tweeters in a bloody rampage.
And it's a listener question special this week on Radio Cricket, not because we're lazy and uninspired, but because we're benevolent and egalitarian. So, Nishant, first up, we've got a question from Raj Singh, and he says, in my opinion, Sachin is slightly confused about his role at Mumbai Indians. Sometimes he tried to accelerate too fast, sometimes hold the innings. Now, Nishant, this is an issue hotter than Ravi Shastri's armpits during a pitch report. So what on earth do you make of Sachin's performances? Do you agree with Raj?
Well, yeah, James, it is kind of the uncomfortable truth going right now in the IPL. Because, of course, Sachin Tendulkar is coming under some sort of criticism from some sections of social media, and from some sections of social media, I'll say specifically Alt Cricket, and we've been discussing his innings structure more than anything. It's not whether Sachin Tendulkar is good enough, it's actually just questioning the actual method of how he builds an innings, and specifically in the context of Mumbai Indians innings as well. Because, for example, a lot of people have been comparing Tendulkar to Dravid in this sort of role. For Rajasthan Royals, Dravid plays the sort of sheet and anchor role. He's batted opener, number 3 and number 4 as well. And he's expected to bat through the majority of the innings, just keep the strike ticking over. But that's because Rajasthan don't really have the sort of depth that Mumbai can boast. If you're in a team like Mumbai, you don't just want to be batting through the innings at a strike rate of perhaps 110 to 120. You actually want to be getting off to a really explosive start, and that's exactly where Mumbai have failed over the past few years. And that has led to our first Frankenstein creation, if you will, Tendulkar, being torn apart at the seams. Ricky Ponting played the other game. As a non-bowling, non-batting captain, he put himself so far down the order that he didn't even get a go. And what do you know, Mumbai actually lost that game very comfortably against Delhi by 9 wickets. So it shows that Mumbai really are struggling with their formulas. The uncomfortable truth is that a slow 50 from Sachin is not worth the same as perhaps a slow 10, a slow 15, a slow 20 from Sachin. Ultimately, you do want him to score a few runs, but not so many that he actually takes the opportunity for the real hitters, the likes of someone like Kieron Pollard, the likes of Dwayne Smith, who's come in as well, likes of Rohit Sharma, who's also done well this year. You want them to face as many balls as possible. Someone like Kieron Pollard, he only faced 10 balls against Delhi, and he scored 19 off them. In one match earlier on this season, he only faced 2 balls at the end of the innings. It seems like Mumbai just don't want Kieron Pollard to come in early on, and of course it's something we've discussed at length before, the way that West Indies have wasted Kieron Pollard and Andre Russell as well. They should be batting far higher up the order. Perhaps, I'm not saying that someone like Kieron Pollard should be opening the innings, but perhaps they can mix it up from time to time, give him the opportunity to bat at number 3, see if he can actually build an innings. You know that if he bats 5-10 overs, he's always going to have a strike rate of over 150, and so I think it's really important that Mumbai get this straight, otherwise there's no chance that they're coming close to winning the IPL.
From my point of view, Nishant, isn't this a case of Pollard just being too nice for his own good? I know everyone can see what a beast of a man he is, but when you hear him speak, he's actually quite a sweetie. Even on the field, when Dwayne Bravo tries to wind him up, he just sort of shoos him away like a horse swishes away a fly with his tail. I would really like to see him get a bit nasty, and though it might not be good for team morale, the next time he's asked, as he inevitably will be, Kieron, do you think John Wright should move you up the order? Instead of all these pleasantries, I'd just like him to say, yes, of course I f***ing do. It's an absolute bloody farce. But just back to the point you make, Raj, and I think you could excuse Sachin for being a bit confused about his role at Mumbai Indians, because I think everybody's a little bit confused about their role at Mumbai Indians. Viv Richards had his first game as Delhi's mentor, and as a welcome bonus, Mumbai seemed to let him pick their side, which was the only explicable reason for Mitchell Johnson being dropped. He's been quite a clutch bowler for them in this tournament, something which I perhaps thought I would never say. I do like young Bumrah, despite his approach to the wicket being about as smooth as my approach to women in nightclubs, but picking him instead of Johnson just seemed slightly odd. Just to finish, just back on Sachin, I mean, I would never criticise Sachin, of course, but I think people who claim him and Ponting are too similar are actually right, but sadly it doesn't take a lot to work out exactly what that similarity is in this tournament.
And now for a question from Carl Lewis in Cape Town. That's if all the Sachin fans haven't already tuned out. He asks, does Virat Kohli have what it takes to captain at international level?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Carl, for your question. I'm not going to waste time making puns about your name. I'm going to try and stay on track. So, anyway, I'm a big Virat fan. I have to admit, I know some people think there are firelighters dipped in petrol which are less combustible than young Kohli, but I really don't think this is going to be a problem. I think tactically we won't know how Kohli's going to do just from a handful of IPL games, although he has received praise from people like de Villiers so far, so I think it's this temperament question that people are still quite interested in, and I don't particularly go with all this stuff about cricketers having to set an example. I think the spirit of cricket is rather subjective, even if we think of the man who gave perhaps the greatest spirit of cricket lecture at Lord's in recent times, Kumar Sangakkara. He's been involved in a couple of slightly dubious incidents, not being able to hear whether he called heads or tails in the 2011 World Cup, and then the incident where he allowed his side to finish a game with a no ball, denying Sehwag a century. So anyway, I mean, obviously Sangha is forgiven everything for his hair, but the point is about Kohli is that I don't mind seeing Ricky Ponting screaming obscenities up at a balcony, or Mike Gatting poking his finger at an umpire. It is regrettable for a captain to act like that, but humanity is regrettable in many respects, Nishant, so I would be prepared to forgive Kohli the occasional slightly colourful piece of language or the odd middle finger based misdemeanour. But yeah, I mean, I fully expect him to become Test skipper at some stage, although that probably spells bad news for Gambier's chances of reclaiming the vice-captaincy spot.
Well, yes, James, of course, as a Virat Kohli lookalike, I feel that I am fully qualified to comment on his future captaincy aspirations. And it does seem like he's currently being groomed to be the next India captain, perhaps much as Michael Clarke was for Australia for such a long time under Ricky Ponting. I think that MS Dhoni would be a great person for Virat to really learn from. Just his cool and calm temperament is a world away from Kohli's right now, which of course, as you mentioned, is very fiery, very volatile, as we saw just a couple of weeks ago when he nearly got into a mid-pitch spat with Gautam Gambhir, who of course is supposed to be his international teammate. And, you know, a lot of people have kind of assumed that Virat Kohli will be the next captain. I feel that, for better or for worse, he is India's most fiery character since Sourav Ganguly, and history could well view Virat Kohli as one of the more divisive characters in India's history, if he is given the go as captain. And really, if you go back to the 2002 NatWest Series final, you could well imagine Virat Kohli being the one to be waving his India shirt above the Lord's balcony, cheering on a nation with his glued-on chest hair. But James, the upshot of it all is that I'm not sure as to whether Kohli is actually the most deserving candidate for captaincy after Dhoni does call it a day. I feel that someone like Ravi Ashwin is really the man for the job after Dhoni retires. I think he's got plenty of nous about him, much in the way that Anil Kumble did towards the end of his career. Of course, Ashwin seems to be known very much as a thinking cricketer, and I do really subscribe to that. He just seems to have that sort of intelligence about him, the sort of match awareness about him that a lot of other cricketers don't seem to be blessed with. I do feel that just from articles that he's written, from his tweets, from the way that he speaks in interviews, he's very calculated, very calm, and he does seem to have that cricketing knowledge which perhaps we'd expect our analysts and commentators to have. And to an extent, it does feel that Ravi Ashwin is almost one of us in that respect, in that he does think very deeply about the game, and perhaps that aspect of his game is somewhat underappreciated in the Indian setup. And now for our next question from Ankit Soni on Twitter, and he asks, should Indian captains be mandatory in the IPL? It will help youngsters learn the art of captaincy under pressure. What's your say, Old Cricket?
Well, yeah, I think this idea might have some merit, actually. I think perhaps not for an entire season, but perhaps there should be a quota of matches where there has to be an Indian player, perhaps under a certain age, who has to be captain for the side. I don't know, it could get all rather complicated, but one benefit of it could be that this might be a sort of face-saving way for some of the underperforming foreign captains to remove themselves from the fray. Obviously, we've seen Ponting hiding down the order now for Mumbai, and Sangakkara, to his credit, has actually dropped himself, as he did last season as well, I believe, from the Sunrisers. So perhaps this could be a sort of face-saving mechanism if we have an Indian player in. I'd also like to see this come in because it would bring a step closer my dream of seeing Munaf Patel made captain of Mumbai, just to see what it does to his already absurd on-field behaviour. I do admire him in many respects because he's someone who's absolutely committed to seeing the highest standards of fielding until the moment he stops bowling himself. When he starts sauntering around in the outfield like Harsha Bhogle at a toupee convention. So anyway, that's another benefit, but this could all get a little bit messy. We saw a report today saying how much money Delhi lost in previous seasons when they got rid of their glamour players, so I suppose some franchises might be a bit worried about not being able to have a glamour foreign captain, but Nishant, what do you think?
Well, James, in theory, I think it's a sound idea because ultimately it is the Indian Premier League, and to some extent, I'm sure even non-Indians would appreciate the fact that India would be trying to develop future leaders, and I'm sure nobody would really have a problem with that. But at the end of the day, you look back to recent incidents, particularly I'm looking at the Shane Warne incident with Marlon Samuels, where Shane Warne was fined $5,000 for deferring his Melbourne Stars captaincy to James Faulkner in the semi-final loss against the Perth Scorchers, and that was to avoid a potential ban for slow over rates. So you do feel that perhaps in the situation where an unwitting young Indian is kind of given the captaincy armband just for the sake of it, if he is surrounded by 4 experienced internationals, then it could be a puppet for them, and in some ways it could be made a bit of a farce. But overall, I do think it's a sound idea. Perhaps what the IPL should be looking to do is develop more of these sort of mentorship schemes where these young players can actually spend more time with the likes of Ricky Ponting away from the cricket field and actually pick their brains. I do think there's already a fair bit of it happening, but perhaps they could have special leadership seminars or something along those lines where young Indians, not just from Mumbai or Chennai or teams with these players, but teams from every franchise and perhaps players not even attached to franchises could actually spend some one-on-one time with a player like Ponting, with a player like Sangakkara, with a player like Cameron White, who I think is a fantastic captain as well. And perhaps they could pick their brains a bit and, just get an idea of what international captaincy is all about.
And now our final question of the episode, and it comes from Not Mitch Johnson, and he asks, should the foreign player cap be raised from 4 to 5? Nishant?
It is something that has been asked quite a lot over the past 6 years. It is quite odd if you compare the number of Indian players on every squad's rota to the number of international players on every squad's rota, because by conventional wisdom, if, for example, a team like the Sunrisers has about 10 international players on their rota, most of them aren't going to get more than 1 or 2 token games towards the end of the tournament, and even that's generally only going to be when the tournament ends. So a lot of money is going to waste with these international players. So there's that one aspect of sheer waste that's going on right now with the franchises in the IPL. And the other question is that of the quality of the games, because it does seem that overall you are more likely to have a higher quality match if you have an international player rather than one of the local tend to be inexperienced Indian players. So there is that aspect to it. On the flip side of the coin, of course, you have kind of what the IPL was all set up to be about. And I'm not talking about Botox and Bollywood. I'm talking about trying to nurture Indian talent towards winning more World Cups. And I think that even if you look at a side like Punjab, who have looked very weak at times this year, and last year as well, I'd say in the past couple of years they've actually unearthed a couple of really exceptional talents. The other day we saw Mandeep Singh play an exceptional chasing knock of 77 not out, of course in tandem with David Miller, and you've seen other players like Vora, Gurkirat Singh doing exceptionally well as well for Punjab. Last year they unearthed Parvinder Arwana, the fast bowler, who did very well, and you just wonder that if they did raise the foreign players cap to 5, then perhaps one of these players would have never been unearthed in the first place. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Radio Cricket. Thank you very much once again for joining us. Do make sure you subscribe to us on youtube.com/altcricket. You can download us from soundcloud.com/Radio Cricket, or you can search for us on iTunes. Just search for Radio Cricket. Thanks again. I've been Nishant Joshi.
And I've been James Marsh. And in this world of broken hearts and troubled romance, I leave you with the wise words of Tino Bess, who this week tweeted, "Good girls don't grow on trees." Surely something for us all to think about there from Tino. Until next week, goodbye.
I think it was a very poor performance. One of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.